ask your questions in mine if you don't want to be heard. Hello everybody, nice to see you all again. Nice to see you, Amy, and Martin, and Adrian, and Laura and Myron. Who else has seen me before? Yeah. Excellent. I can turn back. So in about 1993, I first came across NLP, and I was interested in psychology and stuff, and how people worked and how the mind works. But I found psychology books to be right. I thought it was. I found psychology books to be kind of unsatisfying because they were full of labels, but didn't really tell you what to do about anything. So, yes, you have this kind of problem. What do I do about that? And they seemed kind of lacking in that. And when I came across NLP, I liked how practical it was. And that was in 1993 when I worked in the telecoms industry. So the company I worked for, it was a big company, they used to run this little short 3-day course in the sales training school. It was called something like Advanced Communication Skills, something like that. So it wasn't actually an NLP course, although NLP was mentioned. And we just did stuff like eye accessing and meta programs and just basic stuff like that. And I used it every day after that course. I used to go to meetings and I'd write stuff on the back of people's business cards that prompted me about what sort of system they were thinking in and what meta programs they exhibited and so on. And if I wrote emails to them, then I would use that language with them, and people loved it. I went for an interview at a company, a Canadian company. I really liked this company very much. I really wanted to work for them. So I went for the interview, and during the interview I figured out that the guy had auditory preference and figured out some meta programs. And then as soon as I came out of the interview, I wrote a letter saying, I enjoyed meeting you and I'd love to come and work for you and so on. And I wrote it using the language that I thought would appeal to him. So I got the job, and this was probably late 93, I think this was. So I got the job, and after a few weeks in the company, somebody said to me, "Oh, you're the guy that wrote the letter." And I said, "What letter?" He said, "Well, Andy, who was my manager who interviewed me, was running through the office waving this letter at me, saying, 'Look at this is amazing, look what this guy's written.'" That was 25 years ago. Today, with a slightly different perspective that I have, as a result of 25 years of doing this stuff day in, day out, I would question whether the guy was auditory, because I don't think we can put people in pigeonholes like that. You are not auditory or visual. People say, "Oh, I'm a visual now." Well, we all are, and we all have full access to all of our senses. So I wouldn't probably look at it that way now. Meta programs, I don't really agree with meta programs, so I wouldn't look at it from that point of view. But at the very least, A, taking the time to write a letter. B, handwriting it. C, it arriving the day after the interview. D, the letter in some way being written in language that somehow resonated with that guy. Regardless of whatever the technicalities of that is, those things make a big difference. And you'll find lots of books on NLP, using NLP at work and stuff. And it's all the big stuff. It's all, closing sales deals. It's all negotiating and whatever. What else? What other sort of stuff have you read about? Sorry, in those kinds of books or
influencing.
Websites? Influencing. Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. Influencing. Charisma. Yes. Excellent. Yeah. Charisma. Building someone up. And it's all the big stuff that in reality you don't do every day. Even if you read books on NLP and sales, it's all about closing and it's all about contrived rapport building and stuff like that. That in reality, salespeople just don't go to sales meetings every day. They're not primarily, the sales job of the salesperson is not sitting in front of customers selling stuff. It isn't closing. They do that hardly ever, really. Most of the time, a good salesperson spent prospecting and analysing and doing market analysis and competitor analysis and preparation and planning and all the stuff that actually goes into doing any job well, really. And so what we, a lot of this stuff in like I say, the books and websites talking about using NLP to work, and focusing on the big things. And I think it's the same in therapy, focusing on big changes and transformation and the reality. Who here works as a counsellor or a therapist or something like that? Yes. So I hope you'd agree that the reality isn't people going through one transformation after another. It's talking and getting to new positions and new insights and making gradual changes. It's little stuff day by day. It's not lurching from one massive change to the next. And so actually I think for those of us who have to work for a living, the reality of work isn't charisma and big, present public speaking and, spatial anchoring and getting the audience all excited and stuff like that. It's all the stuff we just do every day. And I think if our working lives could be a little bit easier every day in every interaction that we have, because every interaction that we have with somebody at work, it touches somebody's life. And they go on to touch other people's lives. I've been reading up on some research on interpersonal conflict and stress for a workshop that I've got to put together. And there's actually been research into how interpersonal conflict within the workplace creates stress, and stress reduces cognitive function, so people actually get pissed off with their colleagues and they can't think straight. And then their productivity reduces, and then that affects their performance, and then that puts more pressure on them, so they get more stressed. And we know that, for example, persistent daily stress shortens the things on the end of your DNA strands that protect DNA from copying errors. Copying errors is mutations, and is generally harmless, but can be a very bad thing. But what researchers 20 years ago found out was that by everyday stress, a low level of everyday stress will shorten these things, which introduces copying errors, which decreases the lifespan of the cells in the body, which will actually decrease your lifespan by up to 20 years. So I think it's actually worth us having some stuff that we can just do the little everyday things with and just make life a little easier. Like if you set goals for yourself, they're just a bit easier to achieve with less effort. If you're interacting with somebody at work, to do that more easily, more straightforwardly, without some of the niggles and the conflict that's often part of working life, because people don't see eye to eye, do they? I mean, I was just listening on the radio to Donald Trump saying he didn't see eye to eye with the Secretary of State, so he sacked him via Twitter. I suspect that's a blessing in disguise for Rex Tillerson. What kind of situations do you find yourself in your daily work that you think, yeah, if that little bit of stress went away, that would be quite nice? It's like in itself, it's not really doesn't seem to be worth doing something about. It's not worth going on a course for. But if you could take away some of that, conflict, it actually make your working day a lot easier. What kind of examples can you think of? Men. Men. Oh, men. Could you name one? Sorry.
That too.
Oh, that too.
I think sometimes when there's like an ego conflict as well, if you be the leader in that situation, I'm not sure how the other person will respond. So sometimes there's no action as well. So one person has to be the leader in certain situations, rather because if they're both thinking about what the other person thinks, no one will ever take action. So
yeah, good. So people taking up positions and people doing things for the sake of power or status or whatever.
Yeah, there's a few.
And it stops you getting things done.
Yeah, it stops you getting things done, but also there's a white elephant in the room sometimes, and no one's got to have the courage to sometimes address it.
Yeah.
And provide that support for somebody on the other side, maybe be the leader in the situations. Mm-hmm. That's certainly one thing that I experience sometimes. So.
Okay, nice. What other examples can you think of?
Micromanagement.
Micromanagement. What is micromanagement?
It's when someone tells me I have to have a meeting at this time and I have to do it his way.
Right. Okay. So do something, but also do it his way or anyway.
The way that I find most effective.
And it's a really interesting one, micromanagement. I work on talent and leadership programs as well, so I coach high potentials who've been selected for these corporate talent programs. And micromanagement comes up a lot with them, both them being micromanaged and them being micromanagers. But they don't see it that way. They see it as, their team don't do the right things. Well, your team aren't going to do the same things as you. And therefore you've got to decide which you're more attached to, having things done your way or getting the results that you want. You can't have both. Because actually we know that, and we know this from things like well-formed outcomes, but also physics. We can either specify where something is or what direction it's going in, but we can't specify both. So we can either say, get to that outcome, but how you get there is up to you. Or we say, you take this step, that step, do this, press that button, type that, send that email, no, don't write it back, not like that, put a space, another space, no, take that space out. Okay, now press send. What did you press send for? We can specify the route, but we can't predict where we'll end up, or we can specify where we'll end up, but we can't predict the route, we can't have both. And people who are afraid of failing will try to specify both, because they're afraid that if they let go, then things will fall apart and it will reflect badly on them. And I think that's fundamentally why people micromanage. So I think that's an interesting, and it creates a lot of stress for them as well as for other people. Did you have a, this Martin?
One that affects me and the many of the people that I work with is managing expectation and where we place our metaphorical bar. And is that realistic? Is it way up there? And when I'm working with people, it's again with myself, it's the expectations we have about ourselves, but the expectations we put on others, particularly when I work with specialists and their expectations, and what that pressure that gives to them and the pressure it puts on their staff, which might then lead to micromanagement and other behaviours.
And that's an interesting one as well, because I think people will, managers, because they need to prove themselves, they project that onto their whole teams and set, as you say, expectations which are unrealistic for the team and unnecessary for the business. So the last company I worked for in the telecoms industry was BT, and it's the most soul-destroying place I've ever known. It's incredible, the culture that just sucks the life out of people. It's horrible. And I worked in part of BT that sells services to other carriers. And we had this managing director who was on a constant drive to prove his worth, even though nobody asked him to. And it's all about, relationship with his parents and trying to prove himself to his father and all that nonsense. But it affected the entire organisation, because what would happen at the start of the financial year is targets would get cascaded down from BT Group, and his boss would say to him, right, so the target for the whole group is, for the whole part of this business is however many hundreds of millions that was, and he would say, so to this guy, Stuart, could you, can you deliver, I don't know, 500 million? And Stuart would say, I can do 600 million. Okay, great. But it's everyone else's job to deliver that. And the last year I was there, I actually had a sales job, something called solution sales, which is saying big complicated things and outsourcing and stuff like that. And my sales target went from 3 million to 42.5 million. And when I opened, they launched what they call the pay plan, and what everyone had to do in their pay plan. They launched it in this big theatre in London. And after the break, everyone had an envelope with their name on that had your target. And I opened mine and I laughed out loud. And I think that's when I knew I was probably going to become self-employed. I kind of knew for a long time, but that's when I thought, it's inevitable. Why on earth would I put myself under that much stress to try and deliver an amount of revenue that directory inquiries makes in about 3 seconds? It's utterly futile. But there were people so it was so entwined with the culture in the organisation that they would try, and they would sacrifice their home lives and their family lives in order to do that. Even though it's unreasonable, as you say, it's unreasonable. It's just a number somebody picked out of the air. It doesn't mean anything. You know. So, yes.
No, I mean, just that in itself is not the fact that if you were to say that out loud, everyone would think you're limiting
Yes.
for pointing it out. It's unreasonable.
Say it
And
out
how
loud
dare
to
you
your
be a
colleagues.
troublemaker?
Yes, exactly. Say it in the pub to your colleagues, and they're like, oh yeah, I'm not going to, oh yeah. Next team meeting, we're all like, yeah, definitely, I'm going to do, they're all like, turn into apprentice candidates. So what I thought we would do this evening is look at this from two directions, before and after the break, which will take, I don't know, about 45, 50 minutes time to take. So who has done practitioner training? Put your hand up if you've done practitioner training. Excellent. Why not?
I do, mate.
Hands up if you've done master practitioner. Hands up if you've done trainer. Anything more than trainer? Master trainer? Just me. Okay. So, what we're going to do is look at this from two directions. First direction is, you've done some, most of you have done some NLP training. Those of you who haven't done any NLP training, maybe you've heard about it. You must have heard about it, otherwise you wouldn't be here, I guess. So, is that true? You've heard something about it, you've heard something about it that made you think this might be remotely interesting. So, so you've done your training, and maybe on practitioner, which is all techniques. At some point you thought to yourself, wow, this technique's really cool, but I couldn't use this at work. Or maybe you thought, oh, this would be great with that person at work, and when you got to work and you tried it, what you got in response was not the same thing that happened on the practitioner training. On practitioner training, you got people going, oh yeah, oh no, that's really, oh yeah, I can definitely feel a different, I feel a little bit warmer, and oh yeah, that's, yeah, a little bit lighter maybe, yeah, it's really good though, it's really great technique. And at work, when you try the same thing, you get, what are you doing? And there's a disconnect somewhere. So what I'd like to do in this first half of the evening is get a list from you of what were the techniques that you covered on, particularly on practitioner training, that you thought, okay, I can kind of go with it on the course, but that is the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life, and I'm never going to do that outside of this room. Definitely can't do that at work, because I'll get sacked, or, you know, so I can't touch people on the leg to make them feel good, and say to them, now double your intensity of your feeling of pleasurableness. I can't say that to people. Or wave my hands in people's faces. I can't do that. So what's the stuff that either the practitioner techniques that you thought, I can't use that at work, or you actually tried it at work and you thought, yeah, I'll never do that again.
I didn't try this at work, but I switched pattern.
Yeah, exactly. I was thinking that.
Yeah.
Swish pattern.
Yeah.
You're thinking of swish as well?
Yeah.
What is it about the swish that you thought might be inappropriate in the workplace?
It's way out there.
Yeah.
It's just
people
too
think-
up close and personal.
People might say, maybe not go down the pub at lunch if you started to come back to the switch, I reckon.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. What other techniques, what other techniques have you learned about, seeing that you thought, nah, couldn't use that? I don't see how I could use that.
End step probably. End step.
What is that?
It's where you ask your unconscious to give you sign, and you just go with it, and you have like a little pendulum. That really doesn't work at work.
That sounds
That's
like
like voodoo.
that sounds like the hypnotic
Just
version
something
of the unconscious yes/no signals
Yeah.
in the six-step reflex.
Oh,
Perceptual position.
Oh, so that one I feel comfortable.
You're happy with that?
Yeah.
You're
No,
happy with that?
I wanted to use it at work because I don't like the word grievance, and I was suggesting that we do perceptual positions or group positions. And as I was suggesting it, this base, because I said I hate grievance, I think the word grievance is bad, I think it's aggressive, I don't think it's constructive. Can we use this instead? And they obviously were completely blank. And I said, you've asked me for an alternative, and you don't want to know.
Did they know what the technique was at that point? No. Okay, so that's about the language seems odd.
And also the fact that it's so alien, the whole idea of, I said it's, it's neurolinguistic. NLP exercise.
So just something in the name.
Just that in
Someone
itself, I could just see
familiar
them
or close friend.
switch off. And I just think it's a shame because it would be nice to be able to try, because I do think the word grievance is really bad. I don't think
Well,
it helps people.
We label stuff by symptoms rather than by solutions. So we call time management training or stress management training symptoms.
Yeah. So that's what I was trying to explain, that there is an alternative way of helping people at work overcome conflict
Yeah. Okay.
without having to use language that makes it worse.
And I would agree with you. Perceptual position is a very easy one to use at work.
But that's one
that was
And-
one that I
But we've got to get over the hurdle of people's familiarity. with language.
yeah.
What other techniques have you thought, I can't use that technique at work, or you've tried and perhaps been a bit embarrassed by them?
I can imagine parts integration.
Parts integration. And by parts integration, is there a particular, because that's there's a number of techniques that we might call that, which is one in particular that you're thinking of?
Part of me thinks this and part of me thinks that kind of thing to
So
situations.
one way we can do this,
Yeah.
visual squash.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay, good. Any others?
Anchoring.
Anchoring?
Well, I said walking at logical levels would be interesting, wouldn't it? People playing on the floor. So, yeah, let's all do this.
So logical levels with bits of paper on the floor and anchoring. And I'm going to add fast barbecue. Let's see how many we get through. Right, swish. What's the problem with using swish at work?
Because the leveling, that's just using swish at work. That's a good question. It's just that I think it's like not many people would have experienced anything like that. So it's I suppose what I found when I work in business is giving people an understanding of the frames and then going to a basic technical meta level or logical levels. And I think switch is, I personally think is more of an advanced technique. So you have to give some people an understanding of NLP before you did a switch.
So it's not
Maybe
so
that's
much a
just my mind
cognitive
reading.
thing, it's not really something you can explain before you do it.
No.
And what I would say to you with all of these things that we're going to look at this evening, we've got to understand the mechanics of how these techniques work. And once we understand the mechanics of how they work, we can apply them in any context or situation. Because if you think these techniques were not these techniques originally, these were just conversations originally. But by extracting the patterns or the structure of those conversational elements, what the developers of these things did was turn them into physical techniques, because that's an easy way to learn them. It's not necessarily how you actually carry on using them. It's like learning to drive or any sort of physical skill. Really, how you learn it isn't the same as how you do it. Because the learning process is necessarily going to have steps that build things like awareness and things to watch out for that you don't then consciously think about when you're actually doing the thing. And so the swish, we know that when we learn a reaction to something, our brain will create shortcuts to a certain behavioural response. And what that allows us to do, it allows us to learn new behaviours, but it also allows us to do them very quickly. Because if we are trying to get away from something dangerous, we don't want to be standing there going, oh, I wonder what that sort of thing is. That's an interesting looking thing. Orange and black and striped. They look like teeth. Are they teeth? I think I'll have a look. I wonder how sharp they are. We don't want to be standing there having this conversation. We want to be acting, running away. And so being able to learn a very broad range of stimuli in the environment and then take very quick shortcuts to act and react is vital for our survival. However, in modern life, we learn things that are dangerous that are actually not particularly life-threatening. And so we learn to react to things, and by the time our brain has created those shortcuts, by definition, the reaction is outside of conscious awareness. So it doesn't matter how much you talk about it, the awareness is always after, not the stimulus, it's after the reaction to the stimulus. And there's been lots of research around this. There was something about this on TV the other night, actually, where, again, researchers were doing some, were researching basically reaction times to things. And what they're seeing time and time again is that the person's has reacted in behaviour about half a second before they're even consciously aware of the stimulus. In fact, before their sensory cortex has processed the presence of the stimulus, they already reacted half a second ago. So if you're saying, oh, I keep telling myself I'm not going to react that way, I'm not going to do that thing again, and yet every time you react that way it happens again, it's because by the time you're aware of it, it's too late. So Swish is one of those interesting techniques that we can't, if we explain it to somebody, it's not for the reason of that having anything to do with the performance of the technique. If we explain it to somebody, then why would we be doing that? Why would we explain a technique to somebody if we knew that was absolutely no value to the performance of the technique at all?
So they understand what's going to happen. I think it's really good to give an explanation of what to expect so that they don't freak out, basically.
So they don't freak out, we're preparing them, we're setting them up, what to expect, and we're having to set them up and prepare them because we're going to do a technique that's going to be weird, and therefore we now don't freak out, but in a moment what I'm going to do is...
And
so
also
on.
just to trust the process, yeah.
Yes, yes, trust the process. Now it's interesting because, you know, in a coaching or a therapeutic setting, the person came because they want to solve a particular problem, and so they're going to have some expectation that you are going to do something. And that's the biggest hurdle you've got to get over with using NLP techniques in your workplace. Nobody expected you to do any of this stuff. So you've either got to set it up and say, well, I can do this technique with you and it will take away your fear of public speaking and you're nervous about your presentation, but it's a bit weird and, you know, maybe we could find a quiet room and do it at lunchtime. You could do it that way, but why? Why when it's so easy just to do it in an instant? By not setting it up, by not doing the technique in the first place, but by understanding the principles and mechanics of how the technique works and just doing that. Because nobody thinks about, you kindly made me a cup of tea earlier, and did you think about, I must, take the spoon and...
I just thought Peter's had a long drive from the Midlands, if he needed a cup of tea, that was it.
You just thought about, if you want to phone your friend, you don't think about the mechanics of using the phone, you just think, oh, I'm going to phone somebody, and you pick up the phone and off you go. You don't think about what you're doing. It's just it's a natural thing. And if we can understand the principles of how these techniques work and make them natural in that way, that becomes NLP in business. And I think is where the real power of this stuff is. It isn't doing the big stuff and the charisma and the influence. That's actually kind of trivial because those moments are so few and far between in reality of people's jobs. It's the day-to-day, the minute-to-minute moments of preparation that lead up to that. You know, somebody doing a presentation, for example, and people saying, "Oh, you seem kind of confident. Oh, I wish I was as confident as you when presenting." This is this is the insignificant bit. Yeah, everything that came before was the important stuff. This is just one more step. So, what we need then is a way to do a switch. I'll show you a couple of ways. I didn't think I'd be using a chair for a dinner, but that's just a lot. Anybody got a spiral bound notebook? Who could help me with the demonstration? Would be happy to. Anybody would be happy to help. Would you be happy to help with the demonstration? Or anybody if you... Yeah, happy? It's okay with you, I'm going to borrow your notebook. I'm going to take a piece of paper out of that. Is that okay with you? Okay. I'm going to borrow your pen. Have you got 5? 9.
I've got 5 if you want one.
Yeah. Alright. So, And it's good actually that you've not done any NLP training. Because you don't know what to expect.
Not at all.
So this is a completely, as close as we're going to get to a natural working situation. So let's say you've got a problem at work.
Okay.
You can imagine such an unusual thing.
Yeah.
A problem that's frustrating for you.
Okay.
And I'm going to show this lot how you might use a swish inside of an ordinary conversation. Without having to announce it or set it up or anything like that. So, James, something that's a frustrating thing, something maybe a recurring situation, maybe there are certain people involved, and imagine that you've said, I've got to do something about this, and I've been helpful because I am.
Okay, what's something in mind?
Yeah, you tell me about it.
So, just in the past couple of weeks, we've been putting on some workshop training, and some development training, and maybe one particular person maybe hasn't really bought into that training, and it's frustrating that their mindset is still a little bit about they're not open to the training that we're putting on for them.
What's frustrating about that? How does that affect you?
I suppose I'm just disappointed they didn't allow themselves to be, I suppose, open to it and not tend to have a preperception of what was going to be in front of them.
How does that manifest itself? What do you see happening in these workshops?
Well, this particular person, maybe their body language wasn't quite right, their energy they were giving off wasn't quite what I was expecting.
What was it they're actually doing? I mean, is it the way they look, the way they sound? What's actually happening?
They're both really, it's just a bit of obviously the commitment wasn't there.
And again, how does this affect you? Because I'm kind of getting a sensation of your frustration. I'm not sure what it is about their behaviour that's a problem for you. Could you tell me a bit more about
No, I
that?
suppose it's when you're presenting or facilitating, you kind of feel like, is it me that's doing something wrong that's making them not maybe enjoy the session or the coaching or the training, or is it them?
So when you're seeing them behaving this way, and you start to think, is it me? Is there something I'm doing wrong?
Yeah.
I'm getting the feeling that you maybe start to doubt yourself.
Essentially, yeah.
Does it kind of put you off track?
Little
Is
bit.
it distracting?
It was very distracting, yeah.
So if I can understand, if I can make sure I've understood you correctly, so you've been doing some workshops, some development sessions, and there's one particular person and you feel like they're not brought in, and I can feel it's like a weight here, it's like a weight on my chest, because that's frustrating, as you said, they're not open, and it's disappointing. Maybe there's something about their body language, their energy, that feeling the pressure here, the commitment's not there, and you're wondering, is it me? And it's distracting. And I've just gone this the wrong way. Tell me what you can do about this to change this.
Maybe look at myself, see what I've done maybe differently.
Yeah. What other things? What other things allow you to overcome challenges, to get through to people, to make connections with people?
Maybe I've got to approach the person potentially.
Okay.
Between breaks.
What kind of skills do you have that have allowed you to overcome challenges with people? Communication skills. Good. Anything else?
Yeah, people skills.
Yeah.
Maybe identifying, understanding, questioning.
Can you see yourself using those communication and people skills that you've developed? Can you see yourself questioning this person, maybe putting some of the pressure back on them a little bit with that? Maybe. How does that feel to you?
Good, pretty good.
Okay, excellent. So we've got a plan.
Yeah.
There you go. Thank you very much, James.
Thank
Well
you.
done. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Tissues are not for the audience. This isn't therapy. I'm still getting over a bit of a cold. So how's that a swish?
Excellent.
Sorry?
How is that? Sorry?
How was that a swish?
You kept him with the visual representation that he wants rather than the one he doesn't want.
Yes, so there's an outcome there.
Yeah.
Yes. What else?
A very the physical removal of the problem. Just just disposing of all the manifestation that James identified in a very visual impact.
Certainly got his attention, didn't it? How would you describe James's state leading up to the point where I tore the paper off?
Quite tense.
Yeah. So
Tense? Good. Yeah, what were you?
you could see he was like very staccato, kind of stuttered.
Yeah,
He was trying to communicate fluidly, but he was kind of like that.
Gestures like this, where you can see he's physically showing us that he's trying to get somewhere, do something, and he's hitting a barrier. That's what he's showing us. And he was quite red. Did you notice he was quite red?
It's quite hot.
It is warm every day, yeah, it certainly is. It's quite. What was interesting was that redness was building as I was. So one of the things that you asked or mentioned was anchoring. So there's an example of anchoring. We do not need to set anchors because anybody we work with will give us all the anchors that we need in the form of
Gestures.
yes, gestures can be very important.
Physiology.
Yeah. Words. Simple as that. They will tell us, they will give us a load of words that have huge emotional significance. What we've got to do to capture an anchor is write the word down, and to trigger that state, all we've got to do is say the word. And those words are loaded. So like with the letter that I sent after that job interview, even if there's no such thing as metaprograms and sensory preferences, even if that's a load of nonsense, just using words that have an emotional connection for somebody makes a difference.
Is that similar to private concerns? Have you heard of private concerns? Similar type?
I haven't. I tend not to think in terms of things like values and beliefs and stuff like that. I just very simply think in terms of rules. And a word will be a trigger for a rule. So if I say to you the word lemon drizzle cake, it's a phrase of 3 words, I know, lemon drizzle cake, that triggers a response for some of you. And if I say chocolate fudge cake, that will trigger a response for some of you. And every word is a label for a sensory experience. And every sensory experience is a state. So every word, some words will connect to stronger responses, some less so. So the word chair will connect to a very weak emotional response. You don't feel any particular way about a chair, unless the word chair or the context of the conversation is particularly significant for you. And then it will matter. The word chair will cause a certain reaction. So all we've got to do is listen to what the person's saying. They're telling us, I've kind of primed this. There was something I did to prime James to set this scenario up in my favour. What was it that I did to prime him?
Add with
I did, only because I forgot to bring my handpad. So it wasn't part of the priming. I gave him a criteria for telling me about a particular situation. What was the criteria I gave him? Recurring and the emotional state. Yeah, what was the emotional state that I asked him?
Was it frustration?
Yes. So I asked him to tell me about something. Tell me about something that was frustrating, and he did. He did exactly what I asked him to do. Because I knew that if I asked him for something that's frustrating, then there will be certain characteristics to that. He's putting energy into it to try and get something, and someone or something is preventing him from getting it, and it's happening again and again and again. And so I knew that getting him onto the subject of something that's frustrating, we would see that emotional response. And that I knew that as soon as I started him telling that story, with a bit of prompting, he would start to go into that emotional state, and he would give you words that were connected with it. And then if I play those words back, you saw the energy level step up. When I played the words back to him, he got redder and more tense. And then that moment that I tore the paper off, what happened then?
You let it go. Everything.
You let it go. The issue with the swish is, if we just interrupt the person mid-response, what will they do?
Reset and then go back to the old path.
They'll reset and then they'll carry on. There'll be a moment of confusion and then they will carry... Anyway, as I was saying, and they'll just carry on exactly where they left off. So the thing with the swish is, we elicit a response, we interrupt the response, and then we redirect them towards a different response. It doesn't have to be better or an outcome, just different. And there was something structurally different in what I asked him to think about on the second fresh sheet of paper. So the first time I asked him to tell me about a situation that was frustrating, and the second time, what was the question I started with?
What are you going to do?
And therefore that question presupposes what?
He's going to do something about it.
It's not just will, he can.
Yeah,
It is
control.
therefore under his control, yes. So the question presupposes control. He will do exactly what I've asked him to do, which is answer the question, thinking about him being in control, and straight away rattled off what, 5 things? Was it 4 or 5? Straight away rattled off 5 things. His communication skills, people skills, questioning, and came up with, finally arrived at something very tangible that he could do to take control in that situation. Now I'm guessing that you didn't realise what you were saying when you said questioning. But what had happened was, your brain had put that scenario together and realised, actually, the person who's asking the questions is in control. And so if you take your communication, people and questioning skills, and you're asking that person questions, now you're in charge. So, you know, those of you who've learned by heart the presuppositions of NLP, what's the presupposition of NLP that we can apply here?
Cause and effect.
Cause and effect could be that one. What about the resources that the individual needs in order to effect change already within them? I know that one. The resources that the individual needs to effect change, James already knew the answer to dealing with that person. Something was preventing him from doing what he already knew how to do. I didn't have to teach James how to ask somebody questions. He already knew that is something that he can do to change the balance of power in that relationship. He came up with all of that by himself once I just nudged him, nudged that barrier aside. But structurally, that's a switch. We pace a current state, we interrupt, and then we introduce a new state. And as I said, most important, it does not have to be an outcome, does not have to be a desired state, it doesn't even have to be relevant to the old state, it just has to be different. However, if I asked him a random question, he would probably, through context, get back to where he was. So I'm going to ask him a question that's relevant. That's a switch at work. Have you ever seen anybody in a meeting at work interrupt somebody else?
Mm.
So this is totally normal.
Peter, can you just explain that about the interrupting? You said it's completely normal to interrupt people at work.
Yes.
Can you just explain why that's important? I've missed that point.
Because if I'm sitting in a meeting with somebody and I'm asking them, tell me about the situation that's frustrating that I'm going to help you with, and I interrupt them while I'm talking or while they're talking and say, oh, hang on, sorry, I've done that one. Let me start again. And ask you a question. Oh, just interrupted. Happens how many times it does. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
And why is that so important that you did interrupt him?
Why is it important that I did interrupt him?
Yes.
Because that's the pattern interrupt. It's the critical part of the switch.
Okay.
So the swish in procedure is the pace of a current state, a pattern interrupt. Technically, the timing of the pattern interrupt in the swish is when when you've presented the stimulus but the response hasn't come yet. Strictly speaking, if you're using a swish to break somebody's fear of spiders, for example, you would show a picture of a spider or imagine there's a spider in the hand. Within half a second, you would be doing the swish because the timing is critical. Because if the response comes, it's already too late. We've missed the opportunity. So in this example, I play back the anchors, the words, so that I can control the timing. Because if I'm controlling the timing, I'm playing back the anchor. If we're doing fear of spiders, anybody here got fear of spiders? So if you said to me, can you help me get over my fear of spiders? And I said, yeah, of course. What we'll need to do is when you see a spider, I'm going to interrupt your response and introduce a different way of reacting. So just wait till the spider comes along. Anybody brought a spider? Is there anything in this room that you're afraid of? We'll give it 5 minutes, see if a spider turns up. Okay, so you see the problem is that we don't control the timing. And even if we did, even if we were lucky enough that the spider happened to come along, by the time I've seen it, he's already reacted to it, it's too late. So with the swish, we have to play back the anchor because we have to control the timing, because we have to be ahead of their response. And with swish, we might say, imagine there's a spider in the hand, and do that quickly. With the visual swish, we might do that because I've got to be able to play back the stimulus. It doesn't matter what the stimulus is, but I've got to be able to control that in order to control the timing of the response and the interaction. So we've got a pace, we've got to interrupt, and then we've got an anchor basically, another anchor. So it's interesting.
So I often see that at work when someone says something and someone's put them down, interrupt, and then this is how it is. Can you think of a way, if someone's trying that you could get their interrupt to fail?
The trouble with the interrupt is it's interrupting an unconscious response. So by definition, we're all defenceless to being interrupted. What I would say is the clearer your outcome, the more easily you'll get back on track afterwards.
So as to get back on track.
So always have a clear outcome. Yeah.
You say it's all about the timing, and it's certainly very effective then. The actual instance then, that you did the switch, what would you say that exactly you did in sequence?
In sequence?
In those few seconds?
In that example with James?
At the instant you were doing the switch, yeah. What bit of it was the switch?
So the swish is the whole thing, was eliciting the anchors, the words, for the frustrated state.
Yeah.
Amplifying that by playing goes back to him. Waiting until I saw his level of frustration increase,
Yeah.
which I saw through the colour of his
Yeah.
skin. Then tearing off the paper, which is a surprise. And then the question, which is the anchor, the new outcome, which is tell me what you can do about it. What can you do to change it or something like that. So the whole thing is a swish. The pattern interrupts.
What I'm interested is that timing bit of the point,
Yeah.
the point where you changed the direction.
Yeah.
What was incorporated there? The tearing off the paper was a
Yes.
possible thing and scrunching up.
Yeah.
You didn't say any particular word like repeating the word frustrating or whatever at that point.
Yeah, because that's the state we want to get away from, so let's
Yeah.
forget about that.
So scrunch and then solution.
Yeah.
Sort of solution.
Yeah, asking him for the solution.
Yeah.
Expecting that it will be in there because the individual has all the resources they need to affect change. If you're doing this with a group, let's just see, same thing with the group. So I taught this to a bunch of internal trainers in a big insurance company who loved it, and they started using it at the start of all their internal call centre training sessions. And their concern was, if once we've done it and all the people in the organisation have seen it, it'll start working. But actually what they found was two things. Firstly, they got the highest learner engagement scores they'd ever had. And secondly, the audiences did start to expect it, and they came into the training room early and said, oh, do the thing with the flip chart. So, imagine that you are a bunch of disenfranchised, dissatisfied workers. Can you imagine what that might be like? Yeah. What kind of things frustrate you in your team at work?
TMI, too much information.
Too much information.
Arbitrary deadlines.
Too many meetings.
Too many meetings, yeah.
Cut bonuses.
Similar to your problem, Peter, about a boss that's all about his bonus or about his kind of agenda.
Lack of training.
Politics.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. Normally you might do this with a team of people who, where you're working on a specific issue within the team. So let me make sure I understand you all correctly. That sounds like a perfectly normal, rational, plausible thing to do. But what I'm actually doing is interrupting your state. I'm stopping you all from shouting out your frustrations. I'm interrupting you. And now I'm going to play back the anchors in order to reset and re-elicit the state. So just to make sure I understand you correctly, too much information, arbitrary deadlines, too many meetings, cut bonuses, some boss's agenda, lack of training, politics, and really labouring, and I can feel the feeling of frustration building. That's probably the wrong way to go about it. Let me start again. How would you like things to be within this team?
Competent.
Excellent. Simplistic.
Respectful.
Empowering.
Punctual.
Sorry?
Punctual.
And one of the things that you can all do to make sure that you behave in these ways.
Be one of those things.
And do you think you could hold each other accountable to behaving in those ways? Would that be useful, do you think? Yeah. And what's your excuse? So, let's set the switch. So again, a little bit of setup involved, which is very simple. You tear along the perforation about 2 inches, and you fold the corners up. You don't do that when you do your big thing, you build it up into across the middle, and you look like a bit of an idiot. So you can do the future. So a little bit of preparation. It's all in the preparation, you see, not in the moments that we focus on. So set it up with a frame of reference. Get the anchors, and then stop. Because you know what people are like. Once they start shouting out the things that they're not happy with, they get into a kind of a flow, don't they? And it's difficult to stop them. So we want to stop them when you feel like you've got enough anchors to do the trick. Simple as that. And the anchors are emotive enough. I can feel that. I mean, when I was talking to James, I felt it was like a heavy weight pressing on my chest. It was horrible. And that went. You know, so even those of you watching James in that demo, did anybody feel that?
I've noticed you said, Kevin, you've done it twice, and then you said something about light.
So, thank you. So, but yeah, and even when I was asking you to, even though you know it's a game, and you know it isn't real, and you know it's part of a thing, and even then you're shouting that stuff, it is a genuine concern for you. I can feel the tension building up. It's incredible. So when I tear the paper off, there's that. How did that feel? It was like, oh, what?
Nice.
It's a bit of a relief, but also what? It's a bit confusing. We don't expect people to do that. And so what we've got to do is be prepared to keep the pace up. Tear it off. Right, next. What do you want to do about it? How do you want it to be? And then, again, taking control, taking responsibility. You know, prepared to behave in that way and hold each other accountable. However you want to frame it. But you hear the questions are, they're following the rules of well-formed outcomes, aren't they? They're positive. They imply control. And they might go on to what would you see? What would you see in the team when people are being cooperative? What do you hear when you are being cooperative? So we might go on to that, but we're just following the rules of well-formed outcomes. It's that simple. But if you do that little bit of preparation, pull the flip chart, it just comes down. And it looks slick, doesn't it? Very impressive.
In case if you don't have flip chart, I can use the whiteboard. Would it work if I just start writing?
Yeah, rub it off.
Surprise.
Yeah, rub it off. Anybody else notice a difference between the two? It's a flip chart like that. Very good. Everything that you can do to stack the odds in your favour. The voice tone that you use when you're playing back the words. Your body posture when you're playing back the words. It's all part of the feedback loop. It's all part of you amplifying those states back to your audience, your group, your colleagues, whatever it is. So there's a swish, and we've got anchoring as well. We've got two for the price of one. Anchoring is absolutely no need to set up any additional anchors. For any technique, there's no need. The client will give you all the anchors that you need.
There's probably a bit of a timeline being built there as well.
Yes, there's
Pull up another sheet and you've got another bit to the timeline and another sheet, another bit to the timeline, or whatever way you want to use it.
Yeah. And in practice, if I was doing like a team workshop or something, the piece of paper with the red writing on, that would be gone forever. The piece of paper with the green writing would go up on the wall, and that would be there throughout the day, and you'd keep on referring back to it. So there's a switch. And actually, if you don't have a piece of paper handy, how could you do a conversational switch without a piece of paper, without the notebook, without any of that?
Well, I'd do it. I'd anchor something there, like, so you're talking about this, you don't really want that.
No need. See, that's just a regular switch. That wasn't really, that was not...
Could you imagine an image of what that image looks like and then just say allow that to
Don't need to tell them what we're doing. We don't need to package it as a text.
Could you just list it on your fingers like that and then have that disappear?
Could do. In other words, we're just doing conversation.
Metaphor.
Metaphor wouldn't be a swish. You could still use a metaphor. It just wouldn't be a swish. So just in normal conversation with some, you know how some people, when they start talking about a problem, they just want to go on and on and on about it. And it's a familiar story. They've told it, a lot of times, and they're telling you that story for a reason, because of how it makes them feel. And if you interrupt them and ask them a question, you knock them off track, and they will go in a different direction because of the question you asked. That is a swish. The difference between a swish and just interrupting somebody because you're bored of what they're moaning on about is intention. That's the only difference, is intention. So if your intention is, okay, this sounds like a story they've told before, so I'm going to interrupt them and I'm going to ask them, maybe think of a question to ask them, or ask them this question. And when they're talking, you hold up the universal stop sign and say, what time's that meeting this afternoon? You'll see that moment of confusion, and then your question. And what are you going to do differently in that meeting? And then you'll see the different response. So a swish is something you can do in normal conversation, but the key is intention and preparation. So use interrupting somebody and then trying to think of the question to ask, because what will happen?
You missed the moment.
They will just carry on. You missed it. They'll just think you interrupted. So it's intention, preparation. Very nice. Parts integration, that's an easy one anyway, because people will do this. I mean, parts integration, in terms of visual squash, is like this, because that's what people do when they're weighing up options. And therefore, that's a fairly simple one to adapt to more conversational language, instead of saying, now place option A in your left hand, and then start to imagine, and as your hands come, you start to maybe feel them drawn to. We don't need to commentary. We don't need a commentary. We don't need to describe what we're doing. We just do it. And a really interesting thing, I think this happened. This happened with you on the master plan. I did the visual squash, and it had the effect on you. So instead of me asking you to put your hands together, I put my hands together. Because it doesn't matter where we put the anchor. You can put it in your hand, or my hand, or Adrian's hand. It doesn't make any difference. And so we might use metaphors. I remember doing this. I was talking to somebody over dinner in a restaurant, and there were some things that he was frustrated about. So I just connected them with stuff with the plate that was on me. So it sounds like you got a lot on the plate, and blah blah and all that usual stuff. And then when the waiter came and took the plate away, all that frustration went as well. So we connect states to things that are going to change anyway, or we connect states to things that are going to merge anyway, and let nature take its course. And it doesn't look like it was us that did the thing. But yeah, with visual squash, I don't have to ask you to picture the two options in your hands and bring them together. I can do it. I can say, so it sounds to me like you've got, so it sounds to me, James, like on one hand, you've got this guy that's been a bit disruptive and a bit resistant and so on, and that's, caused you some problems in the workshops. On the other hand, it sounds like you've got these great skills that you've developed, people skills and question. And I suppose in the past, there was something that stopped you from just questioning him in the workshop. But I mean, if you imagine yourself doing that, how does, blah, 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 blah. You get the point. So I can do it. Recognising the pattern is, James knew what to do but wasn't doing it, therefore there's some separation. For example, you might have said to yourself, but he's a senior guy, I can't just start questioning in the middle of a training session. Would a thought like that have crossed your mind?
Yeah.
Okay. So we know there's something stopping these two things from coexisting. Taking control of a situation, questioning, taking charge on one hand, but on the other hand, but I can't do that in this instance, or I can't do that with that person, or I can't do that now, or whatever. And therefore, the purpose of the squash is to overcome that separation. There's a force separating these things, and the squash is to overcome that, allow them to come back together. Because as I said, Joan's perfectly capable of taking control and asking questions, well, what do you think? Well, what do you think you should do? Well, if that's your feedback, which, you're perfectly entitled to, but what are you going to do about it? And so on, And that straight away is putting pressure back on you. So that part's in directions. Logical levels, bits of paper. So we mark out logical levels, we put them on the floor, and we say, okay, step onto the environment level and tell me everything that's in the environment that's connected with this problem. Blah, 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 blah. And now step onto the level one. This is actually a form of what? This technique.
It's anchoring.
It's an anchoring exercise, yes. The labels are arbitrary. There are no logical levels. It's just, they're categories. They're arbitrary categories. You could say it's circle of excellence. But fundamentally, yes, it's an anchoring technique. And so, why are we using it anyway? To think, how do we use logical levels in that format in business to not appear strange? Well, why are we doing it anyway? Who was it who suggested logical levels? Your name, sir? Rob, why would you be using logical levels anyway?
It occurred to me because when I did my training and I found it fantastically useful for me, I had a huge shift when I walked out of logical level. I got to about the third, fourth level and I burst into tears. It was like, that's why. That's useful to know. So I found it personally a very useful technique. But I couldn't imagine doing doing that in the office.
Burst into tears, no. Quite right. But as an anchoring technique, it's a style of technique that you're quite right is very useful. Because what the effect of the anchoring is in that particular scenario is what? What is the effect of the anchoring or stepping onto that anchor?
Elicits the state.
And therefore?
Puts you in.
Associated.
Yeah, associated.
Associated to that state, and
Yeah.
therefore?
Get there very quickly.
Yes. If we could call it
Anchors you
a state, whatever that
state.
means.
Yeah.
Remember, everything that we associate with causes us to dissociate from something else.
Yeah.
And so it's an exclusion.
Yes.
It's same as De Bono's 6 thinking hats. It's a way of constraining thinking so that we exclude other methods of thinking or other things that we might think about. So here, only think about your behaviour, don't think about anything else. It's a way of constraining thinking. It's a way of getting you to focus. And therefore, Rob, when you burst into tears at a particular level, energetic levels, it might be partly the sequence, but it also may have been kind of pinning you down, and now you've got to think about this, and you can't distract yourself by thinking about all the other stuff.
Oh, that's what it is.
So it's a way of constraining thinking. Now that we know that, we don't need to walk on bits of paper. But if we do get people to walk on bits of paper, it's not because it's intrinsic to the technique, it's because what?
Just something to do with being a kinesthetic learner, is to cover up that.
Because there's no such thing.
So put them at cause.
It's certainly get them to do something, and that's very important. That wasn't not what I was thinking. To be honest, I've forgotten the question. What was the question?
You say it was intrinsic.
Oh yeah, so walking on the bits of paper is intrinsic to the technique. Therefore, why would we get somebody to do it?
So because they're physically going through each state.
Yes, and sometimes just getting people to physically move can be very helpful. That's certainly very handy.
It's a visual anchor.
It's a visual anchor.
And also they're going through levels, aren't they? Like actual physiological levels, they're physically going for a certain level.
Yeah, there's that physical movement and that physical demarcation. It's theatre, that's all it is.
It's much easier to bring a state from the previous.
They think we're doing something. It's just a bit of theatre. How we dress it up is up to us.
I'm not familiar with the technique, so could you just recap for those
Yes.
of me who don't know?
Well, I'll show you, because I have done this on sales training courses. Because what it is it isn't just the technique isn't just happening to the person who's going through it. It's not just about what they're experiencing. But also, because these are, as you say, anchors, they are also going into different states, and therefore they are doing what when they move between states? Yeah, so they're anchoring, and those anchors are causing them to experience a particular emotional state.
Perceptual position.
Yes, a little bit. So when some, for example, when James was accessing a particular emotional state, how did he let us know how he was feeling?
It's very skin toneless.
His skin tone changed, his gestures changed, his voice tone changed. And so therefore, if we get somebody to walk through the levels, they're not only experiencing something for themselves, they are also doing what?
They're modelling it to others.
They're telling us, they're showing us what they're doing. And so, what do you do for a living? And what's your name? Away from
Jonathan,
Jonathan? And for a living?
sales
Excellent. I thought you might be, because you mentioned about targets.
and churches.
Would you give me a hand for a quick demo?
Yeah,
That'd be
sure.
okay with you? What they're talking about with logical levels is we write words on bits of paper and we hand you step on bits of paper on the hill. I won't do that because I've got a lot of stuff down there. Think of the polar bears. So what I'm going to do is, you're familiar with the cell cycle and the stages that you would go through in developing, from first contact with a prospective customer all the way through to closing the sale, perhaps even beyond. What would you say are the main stages of the sales cycle for you?
Identification,
Uh-huh.
qualification,
Uh-huh.
need development,
Yeah.
demonstration of proposition,
Okay.
proof of value,
Yeah.
proposal,
Uh-huh.
close, deliver.
How many was that? 7?
Identification,
Identification, needs.
Yeah. qualification,
That's the first was identification,
yeah,
qualification, needs,
yeah,
developing proposal, demonstrating.
demonstrate value.
You have to write this down.
I can't remember.
It's unconscious, mate. Just do it.
Okay. I've got a book in my computer. So, identification,
Yeah,
qualification,
yeah.
then
Requirements development,
requirements,
demonstration of capability.
demonstration of capability. It was interesting because before you said demonstration of proposition,
Okay.
and before you said requirements was a need. So if I put down capability and proposition, then
Demonstration to demonstration.
I think I can see the problem
ROI.
already. But,
Yeah. Proposal,
proposal,
say decision, close, and deliver.
okay. So, right, got it. Got your sales. So, thing. So, as I say, I think I've spotted a problem already. So, what we're going to do is we're going to step through an imaginary sales process. Doesn't have to be any particular customer or product or anything like that.
Yeah.
But imagine that you're at the identification stage.
Okay.
So this is identifying
Yeah.
a prospect. Is that right?
Mhm.
So imagine yourself doing that. Imagine the kind of things that you'd be doing,
Mhm.
sort of conversations you'd be having. When you're ready, step onto the next part of the sales cycle, which is qualification.
Mhm.
Imagine what you're doing when you're qualifying, people you're talking to, the kind of things you're thinking about.
Yeah.
When you're ready, step on to developing requirements and needs, understanding needs.
Yeah.
Think about that. When you're ready, then step on to developing the, demonstrating the capability of the proposition.
Mhm.
Okay. And again, think about what kind of things you're working on there.
Mhm.
When you're ready, step forward onto demonstrating value and return on investment. Very nice. Think about the kind of things you're doing and the conversations you're having and so on. When you're ready, step on to the proposal. Think about that. How you produce that, what will go into it. When you're ready, step on to the decision. Think about, to be careful, there's a while.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that.
When you're ready, step on to the close. Again, think about what closing means, what you're doing, what sort of conversations you're having. And one more step on to deliver. Okay, great. Would you come back over here for me? So, anybody get any clues about which is the step of the sales cycle which Jonathan finds the most challenging?
So the last one.
I didn't think so.
Who's really for it? I can't remember the name, but when he was close there, he was like, okay, I'm thinking about that, and then he moved forward.
So we'll do a bit of mind reading now. What kind of sales are you in?
It's IT sales.
IT sales.
Yeah, so I sell professional services to
Okay.
deliver IT.
So I'm going to do a bit of mind reading.
Mhm.
I'm going to try and guess the part of the sales cycle that's the most challenging for you and why.
Okay.
And if I'm close, if I'm anywhere close, so sorry, but if I'm miles away, then say no.
Okay.
Is the most challenging part for you proving to a potential client that they actually need these services, that there's value, or that somehow you're able to deliver? Is there something you're unsure about your organisation's ability to deliver the services? Is there something around that?
Yes.
Okay. And so when it gets to the bit where the customer says, well, why should we buy it from you and so what, and can you really do it? You're like, oh, I'd say yes, but to be honest, I think we've
It's quite hard work to do
Yes. So what did Jonathan do to tell me that that was the issue in the sales cycle?
Did he move quickly to the next part?
He moved fairly evenly between the steps, apart from when he stepped onto the fourth one, demonstrate capability, there was a sudden jump of tension here. It was like a clamming up. It's like, oh, there's something I want to tell you, it's really shit, but I can't. We can't do that, but I'm not allowed to say that. Yeah? And then when he stepped onto the next one, demo value, that was the longest that he hesitated before stepping.
Yeah.
So, anchoring in a sequence like this, because every state builds on the one that came before, isn't just an experience for the client. You can also use it as a
indicator of the state.
a diagnostic.
It's a corporate diagnostic.
We can. Yeah, we can. And I did this with a bunch of salespeople. They sold, worked in a small engineering company selling machine parts and machine services and stuff. And when it came to, I think it was prospecting, the guy said, I said, just step through the, so I wrote the bits of the sales cycle on bits of paper, put them on the floor, and said, just step through it, tell me at each stage what you're doing. And he said, oh, I'm doing blah, blah, blah. He actually stepped right over prospecting. He said, oh, prospecting, yes, I said, yes. I can see where the problem is. So we can use it as a diagnostic. And you've seen it with logical levels, you've seen it with steps of the sales cycle. What does that tell you about what we write on the paper?
Can be anything.
Anything. Could be anything at all. Could be steps in the patient care process. It could be steps of the coaching session. It could be steps of the project plan. It could be the design elements of the sequence of the workshops that you do. It could be anything, it doesn't matter. Because what we're doing is we're getting somebody to imagine and talk about their experience, and we're constraining their thought process. Because otherwise, if we just sat down with Jonathan, doing some sales diagnosis, and we said to Jonathan, so tell me about a typical sales cycle with a customer, you would go through it, it would all sound fantastic in content, because content is meant to sound fantastic. We're very good at stringing together words so that they sound intelligent. And we probably wouldn't notice so much the gaps and the bits that he skips over. But when we ask him to step through it, regardless of what he says, and it puts more pressure on him by not asking him to talk. By asking him to think about it only, he will think about things that he wouldn't have said out loud. And that will exaggerate the physical signs that we see. So actually, a little tip for using this style of anchoring diagnostic in business is don't ask somebody to tell you about something where there's some conflict or you suspect some subterfuge or something like that. Ask them to think about it, and their facial expression and their body will tell you. Their words will tell you what they want you to hear.
I think it's interesting because it's something you can use in interviewing a lot. I've read through it already, but I probably haven't been looking at it in the right way.
Because if we ask somebody what you would do in a particular scenario, an interview, whatever they say, they're saying right. And you can't tell if that's what they really would do or not.
If you were doing that like in a coaching session, could you get them to go through the steps and watch which word had the most kind of physiological reaction or most kind of stigma maybe attached to the word, or how they say the specific word then to identify which part could be the problem. So you could kind of do logical levels, but just using, as you did before with James, just the sentence, and then just kind of draw a line around which is the one.
Of course, yes. And all of this, this isn't providing some mysterious answer. This isn't solving, Jonathan's issues. But what it's doing is it's allowing us to focus very accurately on, let's not waste our time talking about qualification. You're sorted there. Let's focus on where the disconnect is, because that's the bit that's affecting your sales performance. None of all the other stuff's fine. And actually, when you're at the point where somehow it's easy for you to articulate that value, or the client just gets it, the rest is just, they got something. That's easy. So let's only focus on the area where there's a disconnect or a gap, because that's where we can make a difference. Right, should we take a quick tea break? Out of interest, Jonathan, if I was to ask you now, how many steps are in your sales cycle? How many steps are in your sales cycle? What would you say now?
I'd say 7, maybe 8.
7, maybe 8. What's one or two less than you started? Because that's another thing. People, if somebody doesn't want to do something, they'll have a tendency to draw it out. So that's something else. As soon as he got beyond 5 steps, I thought, no, that'll be fine, I'll remember this. We got beyond 5, I need to write this down. And I thought, okay, there's something causing him to stretch this out through a period of some discomfort. So, it's diagnostic. We can use anchors and getting people to think about stuff as a diagnostic mechanism. And then we can tell people things that they can't work out how we got that information. And that seems like what? Magic. Yeah, and I find as a coach, that's absolutely the fastest way to build trust. Because if you can create the impression whereby the client's thinking, this guy knows stuff about me that I can't figure out how he knows it, but it seems okay, he hasn't freaked out, so okay, I'll go with it. So I find it's a very quick way to build trust. Now, if you want to put your name down on my newsletter list, you can possibly win a place on Master Practitioner training. I might have already done my Master Practitioner. And we do a lot of this stuff with language and figuring out what's going on in the structure of language and discovering stuff about people that they didn't tell us or didn't know that they told us. That was quite interesting, wasn't it? I think. So just through language, we can hear a lot more in the structure of somebody's internal experience, and that will tell us a whole lot of stuff about them that they didn't think they told us. And I find that's a very quick way to build trust. I think something else, and I think this is for me the most important and the most underrated quality of leadership, which is the ability to give a voice to another person's fears. And if you can voice another person's fears and say, yeah, me too, or and that's okay, or that's normal, you can build an interesting relationship very quickly with that person.
So like slight vulnerability, isn't it? Saying I like you.
Yeah, and saying, I can see your vulnerability, and it's all right with me, and I won't take advantage of it. So this thing with the unconscious signals, it was you that was talking about that, wasn't it?
I can't really see myself sitting there with my boss saying, do you think your unconscious mind might actually be willing to give us the answer to this conundrum that you find yourself in? That's not going to go anywhere.
No, that's right. And yet what's interesting is, as we've just seen with that diagnostic method, people's unconscious minds will give us the answer. And therefore we don't have to set it up in advance, they'll do it anyway. So anybody currently faced with a dilemma? Kind of weighing up, you again.
So many.
Could you give us an example of a dilemma that you currently, sort of a choice that you're currently weighing up?
Okay, so it's whether to stay in my job in software sales.
I'm just going to try my mind reading skills again. Or leave.
Leave and become a full-time coach.
Coach. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Oh, great.
So coin, nothing special about it, it's just a temporary coin. So let's say, for the sake of argument, heads, you stay in software sales. Tails, you leave and become a full-time coach. Self-employed, is that? Would that be right?
Yes, that's right.
Oh, that's tail. Tails.
Okay.
How's that fit?
Was okay?
So you'll leave and become, so you resign tomorrow,
No, I won't do that.
No. So it's unconscious signal. It's unconscious yes, no signal. And we didn't need to set anything up. We didn't need to put it into a trap. We just had to use a trick to force the decision. And then they will answer. So you say, you know, so heads this, tails that. They go, oh, okay, then. Tails, they go, oh, no. And that's an unconscious yes, no signal. They've been talking about this on Radio 4 tonight because they've been talking about Russia's response to this accusation that they used nerve gas on this guy, and diplomats and so on. And they've been asking, journalists have been asking people, are you responsible for it and so on. And what the BBC have been saying in the reports isn't just what the answer was, they've been describing the answer as well. So they were saying that the Russian ambassador or whoever he was gave a very tetchy answer or testing. It was very testing. And that's interesting because they obviously they're implying something. They're saying, it's very testy. He said it's absolute rubbish. It doesn't do with us. So they're not just saying, the Russians denied it was them. They're also saying the way in which they denied it, and therefore through that implying what. Yes, so the BBC are implying that they don't believe, and we don't know. Yeah, it's all conjecture at this time. But the point is that when you present somebody with a black and white choice, they will give you an answer, whether they like it or not. They will respond, and you can use all kinds of. I find a toss of the coin is a nice simple one. Because it's so innocuous, and it's not binding, and it's something that we might actually do anyway. But we can force those unconscious yes/no responses very easily, without having to set up unconscious finger signals and all that sort of stuff. So that's 6-step reframe. It's fast ODQ. They're unusual practitioner techniques, in that if you think swish, perceptual positions, they're like a little physical routine. Few steps to go through. It's a particular thing that you wanted, instant reaction, or a relationship that you're not satisfied with, or something. There's a particular issue and a technique that fits that thing. That works very nicely. But 6-step reframe and fast ODQ are a little bit different. They're much longer, aren't they? They take like half an hour, 45 minutes to do. And they're not really a technique in the same way as the others. They're a script, really. They're really a script for a coaching session or a therapy session. And so they've got techniques inside of them. What's the fundamental element? What's the most important element of the 6-step reframe in terms of how it does what it does, do you think? For those of you who are familiar with it.
Could you remind us what it is?
Yeah. So, it's a technique that we use for working with somebody who's got long-term cycling patterns of behaviour. So somebody comes along and says, another relationship's ended, I always seem to pick the wrong men, or I give up smoking and then I'm back again, and then I give it up again, and then it's one of the, or yo-yo dieting, or those sorts of things. A pattern where I start a new job and I'm really excited for a couple of months or so, and then the kind of shine goes off and I I'll look somewhere else and it starts with these sort of long-term patterns of behaviour. And what's happening is we've got two needs that can't coexist. One is being met, and then the other one takes over, and that's being met, and then this one takes over. So we have these competing needs, or drivers for our behaviour. And so the six-step reframe, we identify what was the first step? We identify what?
Problem.
The behaviour. Identify the behaviour to change. Then we communicate with the part. So we use this metaphor of parts. There's like part of you wants to do this and part of you wants to do that. So we communicate the part that generates the behaviour. We establish communication with the creative part that's going to come up with alternatives. Then that generates alternatives. And then the part generating the problem behaviour accepts responsibility to change, and then we test that and future pace it. Future pace, we mentally rehearse, trying out some alternatives. And the idea is, in the six-step reframe, is we isolate the behaviour that's causing the problem from the behaviour that can come up with a solution. Now, that is, again, we could say that's what de Bono's Six Thinking House does. That's what any structured thinking methodology will do for you, is constrain different ways of thinking. We'll spend the next 10 minutes being critical, and then we'll spend the next 10 minutes coming up with ideas, and then we'll spend the next 10 minutes thinking, picking hold of those ideas, or whatever it might be. So again, just like with logical levels and the endpoint that we saw, it's just a way of constraining thinking. But if we apply, I had an idea, you see, I wrote a book back in, I think the first one, 2004, 2002, 2004, something like that. This book, Change Magic, 2003. I had this idea that NLP's change tools are designed for working with systems, the system within a person. All these different parts and needs and interests and motives and drivers and experiences, all these different programs interacting. And if we just treat one issue, then the problem will just pop out somewhere else. Like people who give up smoking, but then they start eating too much because they're not dealing with the fundamental issue, which is stress or conflict or whatever it might be. So I have this idea, what if we applied NLP's change tools, instead of to the system of a person, if we applied those to the system of an organisation? And that's what Change Magic's about. Because what I found was, if we treat an organisation, a business, like a person, we can use all the same techniques, but we can use them not with a person in a company, with the entire company or the entire team. So, for example, six-step reframe, identify the behaviour to change. Let's say we're solving a problem like sales, like our conversion rate's gone down, and we're losing to a particular competitor, and so on. And we want to analyse that. Let's identify the behaviour to change. So how is that analogous to that situation? What is the behaviour? In that situation, what would you say is the behaviour that we want to change? Losing business? That's not a behaviour. That's a consequence of the behaviour. So what's the behaviour that's called? See, straight away, focusing on step one of the six-step reframe is forcing us to think about what is it that we are doing that is causing us to lose business. So we figure out what that is. Let's say, for the sake of argument, we figure out something that we are doing that is causing us to lose business. Next thing is, we're going to communicate with the part that generates the behaviour. So who is it that's doing that? Let's go and talk to them. And then we want to get the creative part to come up with alternatives. So who is the creative part?
People in the organisation.
Which people?
Salespeople.
Exactly. Not the people who are generating the behaviour that's causing the problem. Because what we will normally do is we'll find the person who's doing the thing that's the problem and ask them to come up with ideas, and that's not very helpful. Because in six-step reframe, if we just say, what is the thing that you're doing that you're not happy with, you say whatever it is, and say, well, what can you do differently? Well, nothing. I've tried everything, and nothing works. Because your thinking is constrained by the problem. And so what we have to do is isolate that way of thinking, and then talk to the creative part. Say, creative part, you can just come up with as many wild, different ideas as you can. They don't have to be sensible or plausible, they just have to be different. and we get the creative part to generate lots of ideas. So in a business, let's say for the sake of argument that it's the salespeople that are doing something inadvertently, without meaning to, that's causing them to lose business. So we don't ask them to solve it. We go and find some people who have no idea what's going on, and we ask them to come up with some ideas. They're not solutions. The biggest problem we have with this sort of trying to solve problems in business is we go straight from defining the problem to finding a solution. Can't do that in one step. We've got to create alternatives first. So we can use the method of the 6-step reframe as a problem-solving checklist or a problem-solving process within a system, because that's what it's designed for. We don't have to explain that we're going to do a 6-step reframe now. We just say, okay, let's go and talk to some people and let's find out, okay, so salespeople, you're prepared to do something different. Let's say for the sake of argument, whatever you're doing now isn't working, do you accept that? Yes. So let's try some different things. We don't know what's going to work, so let's try a bunch of different things and let's measure them and let's see what measure the effect of these things. That would be a scientific approach. So we can use a 6-step reframe. We don't need to set up unconscious signals. We just ask people to think about stuff and they will answer us anyway, whether they like it or not. And fast OVQ, what's the fundamental, what's the essential component, what's the essential bit, the middle, the central part of fast OVQ that does the job? The scrambling, yes. That's the change in the submodalities, the scrambling of the memory. In order to be able to scramble the memory, what did we have to do first? Dissociate. So there's two parts to fast OVQ. It's a dissociation followed by disruption. We can't just do a disruption because they're so close to the thing that they have this strong emotional response to. We're just asking them to think about it and they'll be responding and they're not listening to us and we don't get anywhere. We can't ask somebody to think about spiders and then say, imagine the spider's got pink ears and imagine its music playing and whatever. Can't do that because he's just thinking, oh, spiders! And is somewhat distracted by that. So what we've got to do is dissociate so that we can have a conversation about the topic without the strong emotional response, and then we can do the scramble. So two things I would suggest. Firstly, we can just do the dissociation. So just imagine you. See, the thing with this fast OVQ is by definition, we're going to be using it with a phobia or a strong reaction to something, a strong feeling about something. Somebody earlier mentioned about fear of public speaking. You were talking about it at a break time, weren't you? So, anybody got a mobile phone they can make? Thank you. So, a friend of mine, John, is very clever. Works for a company that does some sort of finance, planning, retirement, pensions and stuff like that. And he often gets people who are nervous about doing particular things. So public speaking, doing a presentation might be a common one. So he's developed this really nice application of a fast phobia cure, where he gets somebody to imagine themselves doing a presentation, while they imagine him videoing it with his phone. Now this is very important. You don't actually video them doing the presentation, because that defeats the object of it. Because the issue, remember, is imaginary. Anybody ever been on a presentation skills course where they videoed you and made you watch a video of yourself? Was that helpful?
Yeah.
Tends to make it worse, because what people do is they fixate on little niggly things that they don't like about themselves. Generally not very helpful. And that's not what the audience sees anyway. And in reality, you're not presenting for your own benefit, you're presenting because you want something from the audience. So what they think is far more important than what you think. So what he does is he gets somebody to imagine themselves presenting, and he pretend, he says, imagine I'm videoing with my phone at the back of the room. And then he gets them to look at themselves, to watch an imaginary video on the screen. And imagine looking at yourself, doing your presentation, what do you see? Straight away that's done the job of the dissociation. Because now they're looking at themselves here, which means that they are dissociated. because they're not in, they're not seeing themselves, and therefore you can't see yourself and be yourself at the same time. So straight away it's dissociating. You ask them to look at it and make and imagine they can edit the video and change anything about it that they, and then imagine them doing it from a different angle. The back of the room now.
It's already made it small.
It's already made it small, put it on, and he's using this as an anchor to help them to focus on it and picture themselves on the screen. Very nice. It's a very neat application. Very neat application of fast phobia cure. And that really is just a vanilla fast phobia cure. That's not adaptive. That's not fancy anything that like I've done with the swish or the logical levels. That is a pure raw fast phobia cure, really, just brought up to date, from the old cinema with the velvet seats. He just brought it up to date with a mobile phone. And he uses that at work almost every week. Because how easy is it to say to somebody, so imagine I videoed you, imagine you watching yourself on the phone. And therefore, all we're doing is we're just taking these, we're understanding these techniques and the structure of how they work. Not just taking the technique as you've been taught it on the training course and regurgitating that, because that's only one way to do it. Thinking, what is the underlying structure of this technique? How does it work? What are the steps? What are the components? What are the critical parts to it? And then how can I put those ingredients into this, whatever it is I do for work, whatever it might be. And like I said, the magic isn't in the moment that you're tearing the flip chart paper off, or you're getting somebody to walk on the imaginary sales cycle or whatever. That's not where the magic's happening. It's all in the preparation and the setup. The most crucial part of all of this, in terms of your use of these techniques, is what? I've mentioned it a couple of times already this evening. What do you think is the most crucial thing for you to have straight in your mind before you use any of this stuff at work? No?
Intention.
Yes, your intention. Like I said, it's no use getting halfway through a swish and then wondering what the next question is going to be. That's your intention. You go into that conversation with the intention that you're going to do something that's going to be of service to that person. That you're not going to listen to their story because they tell you the story in lieu of telling you what they really want for whatever reason they do want. So you're not really listening to them. So when you interrupt them, it's not an issue for you because you won't really listen to them anyway. Because your intention was, I'm going to listen to that person only long enough to collect a few words as anchors, which I'm going to play back and interrupt, and then I'm going to ask them this question. And you knew all that before you even walked in there. Or at the very least, when you're sitting in the meeting and you're starting to think, oh, I can see which way this is going, I'm going to do something about this. That's the point at which you set that intention and you prepare for it. You don't think of it on the fly. A lot of the stuff that I'm doing, that I'm showing you, seems very spontaneous, but it really isn't. This is all set up in advance. When I came here tonight, I didn't have any content in mind. I just knew structure. I'll give you a bit of an intro and I'll ask you for some, things that frustrate you and we'll talk about that. But having said that, I know exactly what's going to come up. Logical levels was a surprise, but the others were pretty much what I was going to expect. But you can have asked me any NLP technique, any technique, and I'll give you ways that we can adapt it to use it at work. So the title of the session was How to Use NLP at Work Without Thinking Something Really Strange. Something like that. Because I think, if you've invested in NLP practitioner training, you've spent some money on it. Why wouldn't you want to use that in every day of your life in situations where you're experiencing a bit of conflict and stress? Why wouldn't you use these tools that you've learned to do some good for you and for the lives of the people that you're touching every day? Why wouldn't you use it to make a difference? All for the want of what? Thinking that there's only one way to do a particular technique. Hopefully, as you've seen tonight, there are limitless ways, countless ways to how we use these techniques. But the crucial thing is we've got to deconstruct them and understand how do these things really work, what are the critical components, and then put those ingredients back together in a different order, in a different context. And I think a critical thing actually is, as I've said earlier, don't announce what you're doing. Don't tell somebody I'm going to do a technique with you now. Or if you do that, then understand your reason for doing that is what. Theatre. It's to give them something to focus on other than... It's going to be useful in some way for their outcome. And all the stuff you read about influence and NLP and sales and charisma, you mentioned charisma.
No,
He's okay.
Charisma and all that sort of stuff. You know, all this big stuff, headline, you know, it seems exciting, but that's, you know, I think that's not where the value is. Because in reality, that's such a minority part of almost anyone's job. The majority part of your job is you just want to go to work and get stuff done. And feel like you can be productive. And feel like you're working with people who kind of want the same things that you do and aren't, you know, just going out their way to mess things up for you. And therefore, you know, we haven't really talked about that this evening, those sorts of issues of, you know, how do we get people to do what we want and stuff like that. But so I'll leave you with a final tip for that. How do I get somebody to do what I want? It's very simple. Tell them what you want. You would be amazed how many times people will say, oh, why does that person not do what I want? Well, what do you say when you ask them? Well, blah, blah, blah. So basically, you don't actually tell them what you want. They think they are. If you listen to what people say when they say what they want, you'll notice something interesting. Try this at work tomorrow. When you listen to people talking about what they want, what you'll actually hear is people giving you a commentary on what they're doing, instead of telling you what they want. Now, why don't people just tell you what they want?
Half the time because they don't really know themselves what they want.
They might not know themselves, and a very common issue is they don't think that you'll give it to them. So they save themselves the embarrassment by not asking you for it in the first place, but they still want it. So what they do is give you a commentary. They'll walk around. Somebody did this on a practitioner course I was running this morning, walking around the room for ages. And then eventually, I was sat there watching her. And eventually she said, I'm looking for the remote control for the air conditioning. And I said, oh. What she meant to say was, can anyone tell me where the remote control for the air conditioning? But that would have constituted asking for help, and people who ask for help are weak, and therefore you don't do that. But it doesn't make the need go away. So eventually that need will get so strong it spills out into the person giving you a commentary on what they're doing in the hope that you will figure out what they need and give it to them without them asking. And that's fine. So I'll leave you with one final story from a guy who came on a practitioner course a few years back. He used to worked most of his life in a bank, a bank in Scotland, a big bank. And he said back in the old days, like in the 60s or 70s, the most junior person in the branch, their job, one of their jobs was the morning break to go out and fetch snacks and stuff for people. He said it was called running errands, doing errands for people. And so the job of the junior clerk was to go around the branch and ask people what they wanted. And people would say, oh, pack of salt and crisps, or, you know, a bottle of Lucozade, or whatever. He goes to the head clerk, and the head clerk says, I'll have, I can't remember the name of the tobacco. Can somebody, loose tobacco, Golden Virginia, is that? Let's say that for the sake of argument, because I can't remember what it was. So he says, can I get you anything? And the head clerk says, get me an ounce of golden tobacco, Golden Virginia, and if I haven't got that, get me anything. The lad goes out, comes back with a pork pie. So if you're not that bothered about what you want, be vague. So the simple way to get other people to do what you want is just to tell them what you want to do. I know it sounds simple and obvious because you think you do that anyway, but I guarantee you don't. And if you at work tomorrow, listen out to what other people say, you'll be amazed how often you will hear people describing what they are doing instead of asking for what they want. And if you just do that a little bit more often than you do, you can get what you want a little bit more often than you do, and you'll be a little bit happier, and then you live a lot longer. I look forward to very much. Well, maybe, you know, that's something to look forward to. So thank you very, very much for your time and attention. Thank you very much. Anybody wants a copy of the book? It's probably 25, but if anybody wants it this evening, you can have it for 15, because that's the offer that was on my newsletter. Thank you very much. Yes, all my questions.
How can we apply how can we extend what you teach us tonight? The whole world.
How can we extend it to the whole world? Well, if you all do it, and you touch people, and they touch people, and they touch people, then, you know, if we keep on doing that, we'll make it happen. But it's got to start somewhere. It's got to start with us, really, hasn't it? So, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.